Hello, I'm Dr. George Simon, and welcome to another edition of the new Character Matters program. Today's program continues a discussion that we've been having on narcissism, the series titled All About Narcissism, everything you wanted to know, and maybe even some things you didn't want to know about this phenomenon of our age. A lot of talk out there these days about narcissism. A lot of information, unfortunately, about it too. What it is, what it isn't, what constitutes a narcissistic personality disorder versus an individual who has some narcissistic traits in their personality. And we've been talking about some of the more serious manifestations of narcissism in the most recent programs. But today's program, in line with the article that I have posted on my blog at drgeorgesimon.com or manipulative-people.com, either URL will take you to the same place. That article recently posted just today is all about a quite unique type of narcissistic personality that actually comes in two varieties. We'll talk about that in just a bit. But today's program is dedicated to the amorous narcissist, a particular kind of individual who can be charming, engaging, quite lovable at times, but nonetheless, because of their self-centeredness and because of other characteristics that they possess, not the best of intimate relationship partners. So we're going to be talking about that on today's edition of the new Character Matters. So welcome, and let's begin a discussion, shall we? Now, first we need to set a little backdrop for this discussion. We need to review a couple of things for the benefit of folks who are just tuning in, and also just to kind of set a framework for understanding this kind of personality. We need to revisit the fact that character disturbance is the phenomenon of our age, and it is a spectrum phenomenon. It varies as the type and the level of severity. But it is the phenomenon of our age. More folks have problems in their lives and bring problems into the lives of others, not so much because of their neurotic fears and insecurities, but rather because of arrests in their overall character development. They haven't basically grown up emotionally, psychologically, spiritually. And that's why they're having so many problems these days. And we're just beginning to understand all of these dimensions of personality that can cause problems. Narcissism is one of those dimensions of personality that can cause problems and lead to some significant character disturbances. Now, not all folks with some narcissistic traits in their personality are narcissistic personality disorders. But nonetheless, narcissism is a problematic trait to have, no matter how it's expressed, and no matter where someone lies on the character disturbance spectrum. Now, we've talked before in prior programs, and you can peruse the YouTube channel here for those other programs, or go to my blog at drgeorgesimon.com. That's drgeorgesimon.com, and search for the many articles on narcissism, especially the two main varieties of narcissism. When I wrote my first two books, In Sheep's Clothing, Understanding and Dealing with Manipulative People, and my second book, Character Disturbance, The Phenomenon of Our Age, I had been doing clinical research for about 12 years before I wrote the books. And in that time, it became quite apparent that there were two main types of narcissism. Prior to that, professionals had long believed that there was only one type of narcissism and that it had certain underpinnings. We have come to realize that this is a very short-sighted and inaccurate conceptualization of narcissism. And I realized this early on in my research, but we didn't have any hard empirical research to back up the notion. So in my books, in my first two books, I made a distinction between what I called the more classically neurotic type of narcissism that is characterized by inner feelings of insecurity, low self-worth, uncertainty about one's self and one's lovability, and a kind of unconscious compensation for that by putting on an air of confidence, by displaying perhaps some braggadocio, when underneath it all, the person doesn't feel very good about themselves and is quite insecure. We used to think this was the only type, but I was coming across increasingly a very, very different type. A type that we now call the grandiose type. And that in my books, because we didn't have a name for it then, I called the more character disturbed type. And these individuals weren't compensating for anything. They truly believed in their greatness. They were, as one researcher so aptly describes, legends in their own minds. They were convinced of their superiority, convinced of their greatness, and it wasn't an act, and it had severely negative consequences because they acted with a sense of entitlement, believing in their superiority, in their special status, and in their greatness. They felt entitled to prey upon and to use and abuse those that they regarded as lower or inferior to them. So I realized early on in my research that there were these two main types of narcissism. Now, as I mentioned, the empirical research has confirmed this. And generally speaking, these days, we talk in terms of the more vulnerable type. That's the type that I refer to in my books as the more classically neurotic type, and the more grandiose type. That's the type that I refer to in my books as the more character disturbed type. And the unique personality that I'm going to be talking about today, the amorous narcissist, actually comes in both types with a very big difference. So let's talk first about the personality type that I wrote about in this week's offering on the blog at manipulative-people.com or drgeorgesimon.com. Mainly the more vulnerable amorous narcissist. Now, with amorous narcissism, what's going on at the core, the term amorous having to do with love-seeking, or what appears to be love-seeking. The amorous narcissist appears to be a lover, comes across as a lover, but is really a rabid love seeker. And more specifically, not a true love seeker, but rather an attention, admiration, adulation seeker, sometimes even affirmation seeker. it's an important distinction to note that more neurotic or insecure or vulnerable types are very, very different. So let's start with the more vulnerable type of amorous narcissist. These folks can be very charming, and they can seem so likable and so lovable because they often have good relationship skill, good connection skill. They seem to make easy and fairly significant connections with other people. As a matter of fact, many of these folks tend to be more on the extroverted side and are skilled at making connections, and they get a lot of energy. They enliven themselves with their interpersonal contacts. Now, vulnerable or fairly neurotic amorous narcissists have one agenda, and that is to solicit your admiration, sometimes your adulation, to solicit your love and care for them. That's what they're hungry for. Underneath it all, they're struggling with their sense of self-worth. They have an emotional void that needs to be filled, or that they desire to be filled, and you're just the person to do it. And how they secure that admiration, that adulation, that caring from you is by tending to your needs, or at least appearing to tend to your needs, being needy themselves and thriving on that attention and that adulation and admiration. They'll do whatever they have to do to solicit that from you. Many times that involves what we call the ego massage. Being ego needy themselves, these vulnerable amorous types will feed you all that you need to feel great about yourself. They have kind of an easy read of folks. They kind of know what's going on with you. It's easy for them to spot another emotionally needy person, and they're very willing to enter into a contract with you of sorts. I'm perfectly willing to build you up, but I fully expect that you will build me up too, largely as a result. Now, many of these individuals, many of these narcissistic individuals are skilled not only in the art of the ego massage, but they're also skilled in the art of positive impression management. In other words, they know how to present a very pleasant, inviting, lovable image. Many also have the gift of charm. They know just how to come across to be endearing, and they also know how to basically win your heart. Now, that's not all bad. It depends on what the motive is. And with narcissism, the motive, whether conscious or unconscious, and in the vulnerable types, it's at least to some degree unconscious. But nonetheless, the motive is always self-edification. At its core, narcissism is all about unhealthy self-love, unhealthy self-focus, egocentrism. They make it seem that it's about you, but in the end, it's always about them. It's always about either building themselves up if they're the vulnerable type, or affirming their greatness if they're the grandiose type. So this presents a problem, because at the front end of a relationship, you can be really bowled over, especially by somebody's charm and their impression management skills. They can appear to really need you. The question becomes why they need you. And they can appear because of the great interest they show in you. You serve a purpose. You fulfill a need. And that tremendous interest that they show in you can be mistaken as regard, which is the foundation of genuine love. But there's a difference between pure interest and regard. Narcissists can have all kinds of interest in you, but that doesn't mean that they positively regard you. They may have all kinds of need of you, but that doesn't mean they love you. This is not clear at the outset of a relationship, however, especially with a gifted, charming, amorous narcissist of the vulnerable type. You know, you can first engage with these folks, and it seems like they've known you their whole life. And that's because they know how to read the signs that you have needs similar to theirs. They say all the right things. They do all the right things. They seem to be able to connect at a level. They seem to know your heart. And they even appear to regard your heart. But what they're after is their own edification. That's always at the core of narcissism. That's why, in the end, these types of relationships don't go well in the end. At the beginning, the person who knows how to charm, to seduce, to show so much interest in you that it's almost intoxicating, that it takes your breath away, that seems to connect at a level that makes you feel like they've known you your whole life. At the beginning of such a relationship, it's easy to become swept away, to even think maybe you found your life's soulmate. It's only later that the neediness appears. It's only later that relationship that started out as what appeared to be the most satisfying, intimate connection either becomes an addiction or a big letdown once you've stopped fulfilling the need that the narcissistic individual has of you. So even though these folks come across as lovers, at heart they are really love seekers, and there's a big difference. Rather than being self-sacrificing, they are self-seeking. Rather than being truly giving, their contract is conditional. What they appear to be freely giving to you is with an expectation of return. There's a big difference between those who truly love and those who know how to solicit love through charm, seduction, positive impression management, and the all-powerful ego massage. In our day and time, you have to be careful. You have to be more careful than we used to have to be because there's so much character dysfunction out there of various types and degree. There are so many individuals who just haven't outgrown their infantile egocentrism. It's a sad statement, to be sure, but it's the phenomenon of our time. It's just the way it is. So you have to be more careful. Now there's another amorous type, much more malignant than the vulnerable type, who just wants to be noticed, wants the attention, wants your adulation, wants your affirmation so that they can feel good about themselves, and is willing to do the same for you, provided they get what they want from you. There's a difference between that type and the more character disordered, as I call them, or the more grandiose types, who also can present a kind of an amorous style. They appear to be lovers, but their agenda is much different. They're not operating out of an emotional neediness. They're not unconsciously trying to fill an emotional void. What they're consciously trying to do in an amorous way is seduce you for personal gain. More callous, character disturbed, or grandiose narcissists already think they're all that. They already have such a degree of pathological self-love that they're really all that they need in the way of satisfying emotional need. But they may have other practical need of you to satisfy some more purient desire. So these types of amorous narcissists often turn out to be our serial sexual exploiters. Right from the beginning, you represent an object, a desirable object to possess, to exploit. You become a living testament to their power, their seductive power, and their greatness when they sexually conquer you. You're a trophy. You're a potential trophy at the outset, and you're a trophy once they've had you. There's no heart about it. It's pure exploitation and right from the start. This is a predatory mode of behavior. These types of amorous narcissists establish their relationship with you, maybe turn on the charm, maybe turn on the seduction, already having in mind how they plan to use and exploit you. And when they're done with you, they're perfectly willing to discard you without even a second thought, because they have really no feeling for you. They don't need you in that sense. They want you for certain purposes of self-gratification, but that doesn't mean they truly value you in any way or even really need you at any kind of an emotional level. They just want to possess and to use and exploit what to them seems desirable and would bring them gratification. And when they're done, you're done. They're done with you. These days, it pays to be careful. At the front end of a relationship, we live in a different time where character dysfunction of various types and degrees is more prevalent. And it's hard to know on the front end of a relationship just how seriously disturbed someone is, or what the nature of that disturbance is, and how it will affect your attempts to build a truly intimate, loving, lasting relationship. But you can be aware of some red flags. You can be particularly aware when someone has that gift for charm, positive impression management, and especially for the ego massage. When they build you up, make you feel great, it should be a red flag. It doesn't necessarily signal character dysfunction, but it easily can. And it's incumbent upon you to beware. Many times with narcissistic individuals, the very thing that they see most in you, that they're drawn to, is all the stuff in you that reminds them of them. They're basically saying to you, as they stroke your ego, boy, you're really great. You think just like me. Go figure. It's not always so readily apparent, though, but there are subtle clues. And in our day and time, you have to be aware and on the lookout. That's why I've written so many articles. And that's why I've written each of my books, each one capturing a different dimension of this phenomenon. My book, The Judas Syndrome, speaks to the spiritual dimension. And my upcoming book, an expansion of the 10 commandments of character that I outlined first in my book, Character Disturbance, also speaks to the spiritual dimension of things. There's too little genuine love in the world, and it's the only thing that can heal us. And it's the only thing that can provide the proper environment for relationships that truly nurture, truly remain, and truly help people grow and release their creative energy and put good into the world. So with that in mind, I invite you once again to avail yourself of the many resources on my blog at drgeorgesimon.com. That's drgeorgesimon.com, or manipulative-people.com. Either URL will take you to the same place, as I've mentioned before. And any of my 4 books readily available from Amazon, some in multiple formats, including audiobook and ebooks. In Sheep's Clothing, Understanding and Dealing with Manipulative People. Character Disturbance, The Phenomenon of Our Age, the book that has one thing that no other book on the subject has, and that is what to look for in the way of getting proper help. This is a big deal these days because too many folks report what we now call therapy-induced trauma, which is the phenomenon that you experience when you go for help and the therapist doesn't really get it and you feel worse for the effort. Perhaps the person you brought in with you is so gifted at the art of positive impression management and charm and even ego massage that the therapist was bamboozled. That can be a really horrifying experience. So Character Disturbance examines what to look for in the way of getting help to help minimize that potential. And then my book, How Did We End Up Here, is basically a survivor's guide for this character-disturbed age, how to overcome the trauma of a toxic relationship, how to pick up the pieces, move on, grow and empower yourself, and help minimize the chances that you'll fall into similar traps again. So thanks for tuning in to another edition of Character Matters. We're going to talk more about narcissism, especially the most malignant forms, in an upcoming episode. And within the next 2 weeks, I will have an announcement about our first live stream Facebook event where I can take your calls in real time. So once again, I'm Dr. George Simon. Thanks for tuning in. I'll see you next time on another edition of the new Character Matters. Take care.